Good morning. Welcome to the 2026 Wallace Foundation Lecture with Professor Bianca Baldridge. One of the great honors that the president has is to determine the Distinguished Lecturer and the Wallace Foundation Lecturer. I cannot think of a better scholar in this moment to deliver the Wallace Foundation Lecture than Bianca Baldridge. As a fifth grader, I recall with great fondness a temporary building that appeared in the corner of our school playground. While it did not look like much from the outside, when you walked through the threshold, it was otherworldly. Bright colors, shelves filled with games, manipulatives, and tools that promoted creativity made this space more attractive than our classroom. This was the site of our new after-school program that I would attend a few days a week during a busy professional period for my parents. I can still see the youth worker, Mr. Derrick's smile, always welcoming and always making me feel as if I was the only person who mattered. Midway through the academic year, Mr. Derrick's kindness would mean even more to me as our teacher got sick and was replaced with a new teacher who did not seem interested in getting to know us. In what could have been a more tumultuous year, my after-school program provided continuity, stability, and was a source of endless joy. While I could not have named the importance of this beyond school space as a preteen and Mr. Derrick as a youth worker, I can now thanks to the scholarship of Dr. Bianca Baldridge. Bianca J. Baldridge is an associate professor of education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is a scholar of race and what she calls community-based educational spaces, sites outside formal school contexts that are integral to students' learning ecosystems and constellations of care. As a sociologist of education, she uses qualitative and community-engaged methodologies to study the lives of students, educators, and organizational leaders within these community-based educational spaces, with particular attention to how these spaces respond to structural inequities and support racially minoritized communities. Her work specifically centers youth workers as skilled pedagogues who design learning environments, cultivate relationships of trust and belonging, and support youth's identity development and future aspirations. Her scholarship has deepened theorizing in community-based education across multiple areas of study, including Black education and the sociology of education, and has contributed valuable insights to youth work practice. Baldridge's first book, Reclaiming Community, Race and the Uncertain Future of Youth Work, published by Stanford University Press, examines how racialized, market-based reforms undermine the efforts of Black community-based organizations to support comprehensive youth development opportunities. Her book received the 2019 Critics' Choice Book Award from AERA, an American Education Studies Association, and has been used by various community-based youth-serving organizations and after-school networks as a professional learning tool. Yes, all right. Yes, we can clap for that. Her second book, Laboring in the Shadows. Do we have it up here? No? Okay, it's new. If you don't have it, you have to get this book. Laboring in the Shadows, Precarity and Promise in Black Youth Work, also with Stanford University Press, examines the pivotal role of Black youth workers in young people's lives and the challenges that they face. Sorry. As being unstable and often underappreciated in their positions. With support from the Wallace Foundation, the Stewart Foundation, the Bloomberg Center for Cities, and the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America, her current research examines how Black community-based educational spaces respond to city change and displacement fueled by gentrification and educational restructuring. Her current book project, Where Youth Work Happens, Uncovering the Labor and Learning, she is busy. We overlook, she is busy, is a co-edited volume with two colleagues in the US and the UK. And this book builds on her mapping of the field in which youth work occurs, offering readers an understanding of the diverse locations of youth work, their constraints, their connections to the political economy, and the pedagogical practices informed by sociopolitical factors. She's going to give her talk. It will be followed by a short time with Q&A. Please join me in welcoming Professor Bianca Baldridge.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I love the call and response. Thank you, President Nguyen, for that lovely introduction. I'm deeply grateful to you, AERA Executive Director Tabby Chavis, former Executive Director Felice Levine, and the Program Committee for the opportunity to deliver this distinguished lecture. I am truly humbled to follow in the footsteps of the incredible scholars who have delivered this lecture before me. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge my family in the room. I was born right here in Los Angeles, and I left when I was 18. As you all know, academic life can lead you to cities and states you never, ever thought you'd be in. From the Bay Area to DC to New York City to Madison, Wisconsin, to now to the Northeast for me, I get further and further away, but know that I carry you all in my heart always. Thank you for being here. I'm at this podium all alone, but I do nothing without my community. I have a strong village. To my sister scholars, my current and former students, collaborators, research teams, faculty colleagues, and the many mentors I've had throughout my career, thank you for your brilliance and your generosity. To my love, my husband, John, thank you for your unwavering support. I'm a scholar of race and community-based education. I bring critical qualitative methodologies, community-engaged approaches, and a sociological lens to Black education, community-based education, and youth work practice, which is the educational, personal, and social development of young people, typically in informal or community-based settings. While many sociologists of education study schools, my work examines the experiences of students and educators in community organizations, after-school programs, or what some scholars refer to as third spaces. Young people spend more time outside of school than they do in school. They spend roughly 19% of their time in school, and 40% of their waking hours are spent outside of school in extracurricular activities, leisure activities, and household activities. My scholarship focuses on this 40% of time when many young people engage with youth organizations, which throughout my career I've defined as community-based educational spaces. I intentionally use this term to center the agency of communities in caring for and educating young people, and to reinforce that these spaces can be sites of learning just as essential as traditional classrooms. These spaces are essential to society because they support our economic and family systems by allowing parents to work beyond school hours and provide children with a safe space to play, create, dream, learn new skills, or just be. They are lifelines and places of refuge for youth experiencing harm at school, at home, and in their neighborhoods. Or they are seeking opportunities that are not found in their schools. The landscape of youth work organizations is diverse, spans multiple sectors and organizational types. In collaboration with colleagues, I've developed a topology of settings to show where youth work takes place. On the left, you can see the types of activities that can occur: mentoring, academic support, college prep, sports, youth organizing. And on the right, where they occur. You might be most familiar with national programs, such as the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA. But beyond these long-running national programs, the landscape also includes independent grassroots organizations, like local youth centers that are not tethered to national networks. Cultural spaces like museums or libraries, faith-based spaces, outdoor education, or detached programming where organizations meet youth where they are, sometimes in parks or in the streets, to offer food, clothing, and sometimes temporary shelter. This diversity in the landscape means that funding sources, approaches to youth engagement, and constraints vary. Many of these spaces are hidden in plain sight, and the workers within them often labor in the shadows. These spaces function because of the dedication of youth workers, the professionals who teach, counsel, mentor, and support young people as core staff members in these organizations. According to the Association of Child and Youth Care Practice, there are 2.5 million youth workers in the United States, compared to about 3.5 million of public school teachers. As trusted non-parental adults who guide young people in developing crucial aspects of their identities, youth workers are vital to young people's experiences in these spaces. My engagement with community-based education and youth work began here in California. My research is grounded in my lived experience as a once shy teenager who participated in youth programs and somehow ended up leading a statewide youth organization as a high school student, which gave me the skills to effect change in my school environment. My scholarship is also informed by my upbringing, being raised by a close-knit Black family and loving parents committed to education in South Central Los Angeles, and by the legacy of my grandparents who migrated to California from Shreveport, Louisiana, and from Galveston and Brazoria, Texas. My commitment to this area of research is also informed by my years as a youth worker in multiple cities throughout the country and abroad, including countries like Japan and South Africa. These memories, my biography, and the history that make me who I am have deeply informed the work that I do. When I was invited to give this lecture, I knew that I wanted to connect the past, present, and future of community-based education and youth work. I'm trained as a sociologist of education, not as a historian, but it's almost impossible to talk about contemporary challenges in education without acknowledging history in some way. And given the moment we're living in, one of immense suffering, authoritarian logics and actions, ongoing wars and genocides, I find myself turning to scholars, thinkers, writers, and activists before me. This led me to the concept of rememory as a way to remember, recollect, and honor the ideas, resistance, and community building of the past toward greater justice in the present and future. I first turned to renowned author Toni Morrison and her masterpiece, Beloved, which I tried to read in the 9th grade. I had to reread it again in college. In Beloved, she evokes rememory to show how the characters rely on shared memories to understand their past. Rememory becomes a way of reclaiming histories that have been forgotten or repressed. Then I looked to education scholars like Cynthia Dillard, Jeong-Eun Rhee, Joyce King, Lex Hunter, and others who advanced Black feminist and decolonial feminist understandings of rememory. As Dillard reflects on her engagement with Black women teachers, she shows how they felt a calling to relearn what they had been taught to forget. At the intersection of history and memory, my goal today is to paint a picture for us that weaves together the past, present, and future of community-based education through the commitment, persistence, freedom dreams, and resistance of Black youth workers. In our time together this afternoon, I want to take you through a journey of community-based youth work through the reflections and what I call the interiority of Black youth workers' lives and illuminate a few core ideas. First, starting with the past. I'll show how the commitment and persistence to educate, affirm, and protect Black youth by contemporary Black youth workers is rooted in a historical legacy and tradition of communal care. Second, moving to the present, I'll show how my work over the years foregrounds the study of sociopolitical context to demonstrate how systemic forces, social and educational policies shape the field of out-of-school time, youth-serving organizations, and the experiences of youth workers and the young people within them. And today, because we don't often hear the voices of community-based youth workers, it's my honor to share their perspectives throughout my talk, so that you can understand their challenges, desires, and hopes for education and young people. Finally, I'll demonstrate how Black youth workers use joy as a form of resistance, and how youth work can be and is the process of futuring. Aligned with the powerful framing of this annual meeting set by President Nguyen, I invite us to consider what we can recollect, reassemble about the constellation of educational projects rooted in communities, led by informal educators who play a significant role in transforming young people's lives. My hope is that we, as education researchers, can learn from history and use rememory to honor the wisdom and agency within all our communities, and to envision youth work as a process of futuring and world building towards educational justice. Now, the study of youth work spans many fields, including but not limited to education, developmental psychology, and various disciplines in the social and behavioral sciences. Several decades of research across multiple areas of study have shown that community-based educational spaces support the academic achievement of young people and can foster greater attachment to schools. While this is important, these spaces also matter because they nurture other critical forms of development, including young people's social, cultural, and political identities. They are often exemplary in fostering whole child development. In other words, academic success is important, and so are life skills, confidence, self-efficacy, civic engagement, relationships, and opportunities for young people to understand their emerging and ever-evolving identities. Positive youth development, social justice, and critical youth development approaches demonstrate the importance of asset-rich programming and the significance of these spaces in the lives of marginalized young people, as well as young people's capacities to be agents of change in their schools and communities. My work builds on a beautiful foundation of scholars before me, many of whom are in this room, who have lifted up the power of after-school and informal education. My work contributes a sociopolitical analysis to these scholarly conversations and demonstrates how social forces generate paradoxes and precarity in community-based spaces and for youth workers. And by sociopolitical, I mean the interconnected social and economic systems that shape the conditions in which people live. I also elevate the experiences of Black youth workers through empirical research, treating them as a microcosm of vulnerable workers in society. Throughout my career, I've conducted several empirical studies to help examine the following questions. How do sociopolitical forces inform community-based educational spaces and the practices of youth workers? How do market-aligned ideas and actions about education shape community-based educational spaces? In other words, how do things like privatization or high-stakes testing inform community-based youth work? How do youth workers manage paradoxes and precarity in the field? And what are the patterns of racial harm and anti-Blackness that show up in community-based youth work and in the experiences of Black youth workers? The terms I'm using and that we often use, such as after-school education, youth work, community-based education, are contemporary labels for age-old work. Communities, particularly those marginalized by systemic oppression, have always supported youth educational and social development. Just as my research is grounded in my own biography, it is also rooted in Black educational and social movement history. The contemporary engagement of Black youth in community-based educational spaces is rooted in the historical legacy of Black education and the learning spaces Black people created for affirmation and survival. Black educators and activists are central to movements for Black education liberation, and Black youth workers are a part of that tradition. While there are many examples I can point to, I'll briefly note 3 today. The first is the role of fugitivity and agency. From the formation of Black literary societies, to the creation of Black schools during and after Reconstruction, to the emergence of independent Black institutions, which we learned about last night in Maisha Wynn's presidential address, Black communities have always carved out a space for learning, storytelling, and a reclamation of humanity and fugitivity. My colleague, historian Jarvis Givens, grapples with fugitivity as an act of escape and uses it as an analytic to interrogate Black education as a historical and political act, as well as the critical role of Black educators' determination and belief that education and freedom are inseparably linked within Black communities. As we have learned from other historians of African American education, such as Vanessa Siddle Walker, Jim Anderson, and others, the agency of Black educators was paramount to these educational projects despite white interference. Black communities have always found ways to educate, nurture, and prepare Black youth for the world as it is. Historically, out-of-school spaces served as sites of learning and socio-political awareness, helping young people navigate a hostile world. Black churches often served as out-of-school spaces. Advocacy organizations and independent Black publications provided educational and socio-political literature and activities for Black youth. Returning to Givens, as he explains in Fugitive Pedagogy, out-of-school spaces were always important sites of Black pedagogy. Woodson's Sunday school classroom, like the Weekly Home, Black newspapers, and even his association. Woodson's conviction to support the educational development of Black people, particularly as it pertained to their radical and political identities, pushed him to operate into this way. Developing Black children's political identities was essential to understanding and navigating a racially hostile world because a lack of knowledge about the impending threat of white supremacist violence and terror could be detrimental. As history shows, this instruction came from the entire community. Formal school teachers, families, community workers, activists, clergy, and the Black institutions they created. Second, affirming the full humanity and meeting the material needs of Black youth. Following the Great Depression under Franklin D. Roosevelt's leadership, the National Youth Administration emerged as part of the New Deal to help lift people out of poverty. From 1935 to 1943, the National Youth Administration provided young people ages 16 to 25 with opportunities for skill development, employment, and education. Mary McLeod Bethune, a formidable educator, activist, teacher, philanthropist, investor, businesswoman, and founder of the National Council for Negro Women, insisted that the National Youth Administration establish a division specifically for the needs of Black youth, known as the Negro Division. As the first and only Black division head in Roosevelt's cabinet, Bethune worked to secure funding for Black students and created training and employment programs that supported young people's interests. She sought to provide education and workforce development opportunities for teens seeking employment and mobility. Her programs included vocational classes with attendance stipends, student government associations, civic education, writing development, and instruction in Black history, to ensure that students understood their legacies and where they came from. These programs affirmed and respected the full scope of young people's humanity and provided opportunities to meet their material needs. From Bethune to other educators and organizing strategists like Anna Julia Cooper, Ella Baker, and many more, understanding the importance of cultivating Black agency and providing young people with opportunities to reach their fullest potential has been paramount to Black youth development. Lastly, fostering political education, self-determination, and knowledge of self. Teaching Black history and political education would reoccur throughout the struggle for Black liberation and freedom through Black youth work. Civil rights history also marks an important period for Black youth development. From the Black Panther Party's political education mission, free breakfast program, and liberation schools, to the freedom schools of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to Black faith-based spaces and Black civil society organizations, preparing Black youth for the realities of an anti-Black world has always been an important practice in Black communities, and it has consistently extended beyond formal school spaces. These earlier educational projects played a crucial role in laying the groundwork for future programs to support Black youth. Despite divergent approaches to educating Black youth, the seeds planted by Black scholars, educators, and activists, along with the pedagogy of educational freedom and self-determination from groups like SNCC and the Black Panther Party, endure today and are evident in independent Black institutions, including community-based spaces committed to preparing Black youth for a world that often refuses to see their humanity. Through the legacy of Carter G. Woodson's Saturday schools, the creation of Black literary societies, the Negro Division of the National Youth Administration, SNCC's Freedom Schools, and the Black Panther Party's Liberation Schools, and more, Black communities have created spaces for education, deep study of the world, and affirmation of Black humanity. These educational projects demonstrate a persistent agency among Black educators and entire communities. Black communities defied white power structures and interference to create and sustain educational opportunities for Black youth. This agency is quite visible today, as are the external pressures still shaped by white power structures, including dependence on white philanthropy, paternalistic racial framing, the nonprofit industrial complex, and other systems of power that shape youth work in Black communities today. And so moving to the present, throughout my career, I've conducted several empirical studies examining how the sociopolitical context of community-based education shapes the personal and professional lives of youth workers. Just as the social context of schooling matters, so does the social context of community-based education. In my work, I identify and analyze how forces such as race, class, gender, historical narratives, educational and social policies, and systems of oppression shape community organizations, youth workers, and the experiences of marginalized young people. First, I want to demonstrate how the educational policy context, informed by market-based reforms and racialized paternalism, shapes community-based after-school programs. I'm going to briefly take you inside one community-based organization and introduce you to a group of youth workers who became the focus of my first book, Reclaiming Community: Race and the Uncertain Future of Youth Work. One of the questions I ask and answer in the book is, how do market-aligned logics and reforms in public education shape community-based after-school programs? So in the book, I tell the story of educational excellence, a now 37-year-old organization located in the Northeast, where I spent more than a year conducting an ethnographic study. The program is a comprehensive college completion and youth development organization. I first encountered educational excellence as a panelist at a career day for middle school students. From the moment I entered the organization, I witnessed laughter and connection among students and youth workers. I would go on to teach summer and fall electives and year-round youth development courses on social identity for middle and high school students. As I walked the program's floors, college acceptance letters spanning many years, college flags, and student artwork adorned the organization's walls. Writing on the walls referred to youth participants as scholars, high achievers, leaders, reflecting the organization's strength-based approach to youth development and avoiding labels such as at-risk or broken that is typically used in after-school programs. Leah, a Black woman and former assistant principal, has served as the organization's director for 10 years at the time of my study. And in an interview, she explained how she fought to maintain an asset-rich framing of the organization and quite literally battled the organization's white founder and primary donor, the board of directors, and at times funders. In a conversation, she shared, "And then you had the board who was like, why are you calling them scholars? Like, they're poor kids. They're from the inner city." Monica, the vice president of programs, shared similar concerns as Leah. She told me, they want to know how many kids didn't get pregnant or are not on drugs. Funders want to know, how many people did you save? And guess what? We're not saving anybody. People save themselves. Common discourse in after-school programming often positions Black youth through deficit perspectives, as though they need to be fixed or saved by organizations, making them sites of containment and control. For those of you who might have been fans of the HBO series Insecure like me, you might remember the fictional program We Got Y'all, which perfectly demonstrates how Black and Latina youth and young people from low-income settings are positioned as needing to be rescued from their families and the ills of their neighborhoods by youth organizations. But educational excellence sought to reject this framing and leaned into a strength-based approach, which saw young people as already whole, already brilliant, and in need of support, nurturing, and care. Because students could enter the program in the 6th grade and remain a part of the organization through their college completion, the program built strong relationships with entire families, as siblings and cousins across generations participated in the program. Staff and students alike often said that educational excellence had a family feeling. However, after almost 10 years of leadership, Leah resigned, citing years of hostility and misogyny from the organization's white male founder, Richard. The final straw for Leah came when Richard told a room full of executive directors from youth-serving nonprofits in the city that the problem with Black America is that Black girls don't know how to keep their legs closed. Yeah. Richard's comments reflect the deep-seated racism embedded within the youth work landscape. Class and gender-based narratives, paternalism, and moral panics about young people have shaped formal youth work since its inception, and so has anti-Blackness in the form of control and surveillance. As I mentioned earlier, youth work in Black spaces had a clear purpose to educate for social change and political awareness. Youth work in Black spaces emerged out of a necessity in response to white violence in schools and exclusion from the spaces of public leisure and play. Later, after-school programs were repackaged as sites of control and surveillance for Black, Latina, and young people living in poverty, particularly during the early 70s and 80s, in part due to social policies and philanthropic efforts. During this time, many organizations emerged in urban areas alongside the War on Drugs campaign, which fueled the mass incarceration we see today. The framing of anti-Black framing of youth as super predators who were wilding in the 80s and 90s led to the anti-Black calls for the death penalty for the now exonerated 5, who ranged from ages 13 to 16 at the time of their false arrests. This political landscape positioned youth programs as spaces of containment for Black and Latina youth. As anthropologist of education Sue Alquan argues, this led to the positioning of after-school programs as sites to control, quote, male criminality and female sexuality of Black and Latina youth. These characterizations of youth led to racist and paternalistic positioning of Black youth as at risk and needing to be fixed or saved by after-school programs, shaping how youth are engaged in these spaces. This deficit framing has saturated our political and popular discourse through things like white savior films, presenting Black youth from a position of lack, in need of white saviors, or sometimes Black male superheroes. This reinforces deeply held anti-Black stereotypes that ultimately inform funding decisions, program marketing, and youth engagement. Youth workers today must navigate these long-standing tensions in the field. Richard, going back to Richard, emboldened by Leah's departure, the board of directors and the new executive director began using language to describe the program and their new goals aligning with well-known features of market-based education reforms. After Leah resigned, the new goals of educational excellence focused on serving more, prioritizing quantity over quality in the eyes of long-term staff, and expanding the footprint, equating quantity and expansion with success. A year after my study, I returned to the organization to conduct interviews with staff members. The space looked brighter due to an obvious makeover, but there was less joy, palpable tension among staff, and unhappiness with the new leadership and the organization's direction. The new direction included expanding the number of students served as a measure of impact. A youth worker told me that at a staff retreat, they were told that the board's vision is to serve 5,000 students per school year. Traditionally, the organization only served about 200 to 250 students per year. Serving 5,000 students per year would not allow for the comprehensive approach to youth development that made educational excellence so special. Language, such as businesslike and rigid, emerged frequently in my follow-up conversations. There was an erosion of the sense of family that characterized what youth workers affectionately termed the golden era of educational excellence. Just recently, I had dinner with a former student that I taught in middle school at Educational Excellence. She is now a master's student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which makes me feel really old. The program transition occurred during her high school years after I had left. And she told me, Ms. B, after you left, it got more corporate and more white. Dr. Davenport, the director of youth development and counseling, told me during an interview that now it's more like everybody does their own thing. So it's become really kind of traditional business-like versus sort of this collective family atmosphere where we're all working toward the best interests of the young person. When I asked her to explain what she meant by business-like, she said that a few weeks prior to our conversation, the staff received a memo reminding them that educational excellence was a place of business and that, quote, there's no laughter allowed. Confused about what I heard, I asked her to explain what she meant. She continued, it's been told to us that this is a work setting and that people should not be making a lot of noise. And as a result, there have been people in leadership positions that go around shushing people when they are in a meeting. If someone laughs kind of loud, then now we're being shushed. This staff-defined business-like approach to youth work shifted the program's culture, eroding its family-like atmosphere, and contributed to a breakdown in long-term staff relationships. This ultimately led to every single staff person I originally interviewed leaving within 6 to 18 months of Leah's departure. Within 6 months, all 3 members of the leadership team followed Leah to her new job. Within a year and a half, only 3 of the original 20 staff members I interviewed remained. Within 2 years, everyone was gone. I describe what happened to educational excellence as the corporatization of after school. Aligned with how education scholars describe the corporatization of public schools as one of the many consequences of neoliberal logics and policies in education, the corporatization of after school is the corporatization of public schools, rather, is thinking about the hierarchical and authoritarian structures that shape schooling. I argue that this approach to community-based education poses dangers for youth organizations that can be places of refuge and sanctuaries, often shielding racially minoritized, queer, and other vulnerable students from the sometimes rigid policies of schools. Yet, as educational excellence demonstrates, neoliberal logics that lead to corporatization can render community-based programs to resemble the worst aspects of schooling. For educational excellence, this looked like a hyper-focus on growth at any cost, rigid rules, authoritarian decision-making, and routines that objectify people and reduces them to bottom lines. This new organizational culture diminished relationships, and in youth work, relationships are everything. My book was one of the first to connect educational research on neoliberal reform and its impact on public education to community-based youth-serving organizations and the experiences of youth workers. And what I've learned from the data is that these external pressures stemming from the neoliberal educational policy context of the time, that created contradictions within youth work practice. So I developed a theoretical tool to help me make sense of these contradictions, which I call the youth work paradox. I identified that paradoxes and contradictions within community-based youth work are stemming from socio-political forces and external pressures to align with market features or to use deficit language to appeal to donors that can lead to program contradictions that can both disrupt and reinforce racial harm. Community-based programs are sometimes described as either affirming or humanizing spaces on one side or deficit or paternalistic on the other. However, I argue that a paradox is actually at play, and that rather than operating in an either-or framework, there is potential for harm in any youth work organization. In my own experience as a young person, I was part of youth programs that provided me with wonderful opportunities, but that also positioned themselves as my savior because I was a Black girl from South Central Los Angeles. The youth work paradox allows me to hold both experiences at once. Educational research must account for the complexity of community-based educational spaces, and failing to do so neglects the structural forces that shape them, leading to various forms of harm for young people and complicating the lives of youth workers. This complexity, along with the paradoxes that emerge within youth organizations, has significant implications for youth work professionals. I've expanded this paradox to show how it manifests in three ways. First, as I explained in a 2020 article, at the organizational level, these spaces simultaneously disrupt and reproduce harm to young people and youth workers. Second, there is a paradox at the field level in which society, our family systems, our economy, and our school systems rely on youth work, but there is insufficient recognition and underinvestment in the field. Third, there is a paradox in the profession itself. Youth workers' commitment to so-called noble work under capitalism, often within nonprofit settings, keeps them economically exploited, resulting in low wages, debt, and food and housing insecurity. This is also true for other workers in education and care work, which is not only race, but also gendered. I argue that these paradoxes create precarity for youth workers, and that for Black youth workers, it is exacerbated by anti-Black racism within the field and within their organizations. I draw on scholarship in sociology and philosophy that theorize precarity as part of the human condition, induced by context or circumstances, and stemming from oppression and injustice. And by precarious labor, I draw on Judith Butler, referring to the interconnected systems of failing social and economic networks that create risk and harm for vulnerable workers. These ideas are reflected in my latest book, Laboring in the Shadows. Precarity, thank you. Precarity and Promise in Black Youth Work. My work takes a deeper look at the interiority of Black youth workers' lives as they seek to support Black youth's educational futures. One of the questions I ask and answer in the book is, how do Black youth workers understand and navigate the youth work paradox and the precarity it induces in the field? Laboring in the Shadow reflects the experiences of Black program leaders and youth workers from across the United States. The youth workers I'll introduce you to today and the stories that I share in the book reflect the experiences of Black youth workers for over several years as a part of 3 separate studies. The first is a case study of a predominantly white college town that I call Pleasant Ridge in the Midwest. The second was a national interview study I conducted alongside amazing collaborators across 5 institutions. We interviewed program leaders, youth workers, policy influencers, funders, and scholars of youth work from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds who were committed to equity-oriented youth work practices. And after noticing patterns among Black youth participants from the first 2 studies, my research team and I interviewed more Black youth workers from across the country. The stories featured in Laboring in the Shadows offers insights from over 134 people involved in community-based education. Over several years of study, I observed a pattern across interviews with Black youth workers and program leaders. Across time and space, similarities emerged in their motivations for entering the field, experiences of financial instability, leadership barriers, and workplace dynamics shaped by racial tokenism, microaggressions, and anti-Black racism. These studies led to a set of questions about Black youth workers as a workforce and their commitment to Black education and youth development. What I'd like to show you now is how the paradoxes in the field, stemming from broader sociopolitical issues, contribute to layers of precarity that youth workers face and how they resist. I want to focus specifically on how youth workers experience both material and symbolic precarity. By material precarity, I mean the lack of material resources that allow youth workers to live. By symbolic precarity, I'm referring to a lack of respect and visibility for their essential labor, which results in harm that might appear subtle, but deeply affects their experiences in the field. I also argue that anti-Black racism and barriers to promotion and leadership opportunities within white-led organizations reflect an interplay between material and symbolic precarity. The organization of youth work in the U.S. is connected to and sustains education, family, and economic systems, yet is often rendered invisible and sometimes overlooked despite its critical role and support for young people and families. The nonprofit sector structures civil society in which youth work organizations are part. These programs often operate at the micro level to alleviate suffering caused by broader structures of oppression. Youth workers, many of whom earn low wages and work in underfunded organizations, are expected to fix major societal problems with limited material resources. I want to introduce you to Robeson, a youth worker from the East Coast who perfectly captures this burden placed on the field. He says, youth work is expected to fix societal problems with a wrench. So like the issue is actually the economic structure at large and the offshoots above that structure, intentional and otherwise. And we're supposed to somehow fix that with tape and bubble gum. Families, school systems, and young people rely on youth workers. Across all projects, whether interviewed in person or virtually, youth workers commonly received texts or phone calls from young people during their interviews. Hippolyta, who runs a violence prevention program in the Southeast, is seen by her youth as what Bell Hooks describes as an other mother. During Hippolyta's formal interviews, she received a call from a student who needed transportation to school because there was no public transportation nor a school bus for them to use. So after getting off the call, she says, so I'm their only transportation. They shouldn't have to worry about transportation, going to and from school. So I Uber these kids every day. Here, Hippolyta is using her own limited resources to support young people as the city and school district fail to do so. Youth workers are compelled to fill gaps often caused by structural inequality, thereby placing them in precarious situations. For instance, many youth workers I spoke with were vulnerable to exploitation in terms of wages. Chris, a poet and youth worker from the Midwest, did not earn a living wage when he began working at his organization. So he told me, I was busting my behind. I think part of the reason youth workers don't stick around is because they're not paid in a way that allows them to live. He also told me, kind of off the record, that he was managing a nightclub as he was doing youth work, and he was barely 21 years old. Eladio, a youth worker who works with Black and Latino boys, recalls his early days as a youth worker when he moved to the South to a very expensive city on the East Coast. He shared that he had to go on public assistance and receive food stamps to survive. In addition to using limited resources to fill in gaps for failing systems, low wages, and food insecurity, some youth workers I spoke with were also housing insecure. Bilal, a youth worker from Pleasant Ridge, faced housing insecurity while juggling two youth work jobs to make ends meet. He told me, I've been homeless. I've lived in a motel with my two sisters and their kids while juggling youth work positions. Some youth workers featured in my book found themselves in precarious situations because the field is not professionalized and loosely organized. Clear pathways to leadership don't always exist. Educational standards and credentials vary across organizations, and unionizing is not always possible. Many remain in the same position for years without a clear path to mobility. Bilal shared that he was always encouraged to apply for promotions that would increase his pay. But at the time of our interview, he had been with his organization for 8 years, and there was no promotion in sight. Bilal told me that he felt treated as a token in front-facing roles with Black youth or in marketing campaigns for the organization, but never in positions of leadership. Black youth workers, particularly in Pleasant Ridge, were vulnerable to this given the racial makeup of their organizations. In fact, just for context, about 70% of nonprofit leaders in the U.S. are white. So participants reported gatekeeping by white leaders in their organization, creating barriers to entry into leadership positions that would increase their pay. Denial of leadership positions was a common topic of discussion among youth workers throughout all studies. For example, Sam, a youth worker from Pleasant Ridge, explained that he was upset after board members had encouraged him to apply for a leadership position, and his supervisor told him that he wasn't ready after initially encouraging him to apply. He told me, I got really pissed. And what that totally was about was him feeling like he couldn't supervise me as a Black man. He talked about in the past recognizing feeling uncomfortable that it's all white people assistant directors in the organization. And a handful of years ago, when I was in a position to step into a new role, it was like strong pushback. Sam names his Blackness as the reason his executive director changed his mind about promoting him, citing the executive director's discomfort. Other youth workers also felt overlooked for leadership positions in white-led organizations or felt exploited for their knowledge and connections to Black communities. During one of the events my team and I observed in Pleasant Ridge about racial inequality and racial disparities in the city, Gina, a local activist and youth worker, told the room that she is never hired for positions because of her lack of a college degree, but she is called upon to have her brain picked about how to work with Black kids without pay. While it might be easy to view Gina's circumstances as a function of a single program's hiring policy, the exploitation is clear. She and other Black youth workers in Pleasant Ridge are often asked to advise organizations on how to best work with Black youth, even though these organizations won't hire them or pay them for the knowledge they share. Unlike other professions, the credentials needed to be a youth worker vary by organization and sector. Some enter the field through social work or community psychology programs at universities, or by working in state agencies that might require an advanced degree or licensing. Some have university degrees, while others only finished high school, but have been in the profession for decades. There are debates about credentialing and professionalization in the field, but I enter these debates cautiously, right, as forms of professionalization could cause even more stratification. Participants shared many reflections on issues ranging from racial microaggressions by colleagues to shallow understandings of Black coworkers' lived realities to fear of retaliation. In some cases, youth workers' responses to anti-Black treatment of Black youth participants, particularly in white-led organizations, had consequences. When Carlos, a youth worker from the national study on the West Coast, noticed that Black students were being framed in deficit terms on the organization's website, he shared his concern with program leadership, and he believed he was retaliated against because after sharing his concerns, he was demoted to translating materials into Spanish behind the scenes. I argue that material precarity among youth workers is deepened by paradoxes within the field and in the profession, resulting in low wages and food and housing insecurity. For Black youth workers specifically, leadership ceilings and exploitation driven by what they call white discomfort in white-led organizations and anti-Blackness exacerbated this precarity. The youth workers featured in my book are also particularly vulnerable to the demands of the field, resulting in what I call symbolic precarity, marked by lack of respect, appreciation, or public recognition for their labor, and by the emotional and physical toll of the work. Returning to Chris from the Midwest, he discusses symbolic precarity as a lack of respect for the profession. He says, "I feel like I should be paid in respect too. There are so many lives I've touched at this point over my 10 years doing the work." Part of the respect that Chris and others spoke to was the lack of recognition for the number of hours and the physical and emotional labor that youth workers provide in supporting the young people they love so dearly. Just for context, some youth workers are part-time, others might be full-time, and some are on call 24/7 depending on their organizational type. So some youth workers shared that the work can be engulfing or overwhelming, and that breaks are needed if they can afford to step away. The youth workers I spoke with also expressed frustration when seeking higher pay or recognition for their work, particularly from organizational leaders and funders. Aaliyah, a youth worker and former theater teacher from the West Coast, shares that we are expected to be martyrs. We are expected to serve nobly and to never question. And if ever we are asked for our needs to be met, we are demonized and told, "Oh, you must not really care about the kids." I demonstrate that there is precarity, both material and symbolic, induced by the paradoxical nature of the field, organizations, and in the profession itself. Material precarity encompasses low wages, the absence of benefits, and limited resources for performing their jobs. Symbolic precarity encompasses a lack of respect, appreciation, and visibility accorded to youth workers' labor. As data show throughout my work, symbolic and material precarity reinforce one another in the experiences of Black youth workers. And among Black youth workers in my study, this was amplified by the racial harm they're experiencing in their organizations. What I learned during my time talking to youth workers around the country is that in addition to managing the harm many experience in their organizations, the precarity of working in nonprofit education and their own wellness, while also supporting youth in their own families, they also had to make sense of and support their students' sense-making about larger societal harms. This was especially significant during the summer of 2020. George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, 2020. 2 months earlier, Breonna Taylor was killed in her own home when officers executed a no-knock warrant. Floyd was an inflection point for sure, but the killings didn't stop. Tony McDade, Rayshard Brooks, Andre Hill, Daniel Prude, Manuel Ellis, Devin Bronson, and the list sadly continues. During these uprisings against police violence, or what scholar Robin D.G. Kelly calls Black Spring, Black youth workers were faced with confronting their own grief and mourning while trying to support Black youth at the same time. Harriet, a youth worker from the Southeast, explains, "As for George Floyd, I just turned my TV off for a while. It was very overwhelming to hear about it over and over and over and over again." Black youth workers had to find ways to hold space for young people and their families and help them process what they were witnessing and feeling while also trying to do the same for themselves. Robeson, whom I introduced earlier, said of the uprisings of 2020, "This isn't like an amorphous theoretical thing for us." Robeson's students had lost friends to police violence. His students had enough interactions with police, and the events of 2020 compounded their trauma with surveillance and police violence. Robeson also shared that his students' activism during this time was cathartic for them. Similarly, Jamia, a program leader in the Midwest, was managing personal tragedy while coping with the pandemic and trying to keep young people engaged and motivated, all while being emotionally wrecked by the state-sanctioned violence we were all witnesses to. According to Jamia, the young people she works with couldn't understand why the murders of Black people at the hands of law enforcement kept happening. They would ask her, "Why is it on the news every day? What do we do? Why are we being blamed for it?" Jamia told me that the loops of George Floyd's murder on the news compounded what they were already going through. Jamia, who witnessed her young people protest police violence in hopes that things would change for the better, had to help them process their disappointment when things ultimately didn't change. Jamia looked to history for guidance and inspiration from her ancestors who fought for freedom. She raised 2 questions in our conversation. She said, "What can we do differently? Where can we find our niche in this to continue to live as many generations have before us beyond the traumatic experience?" Jamia's questions show how her work is tied to her deeper legacy of supporting Black communities, and that is reflected in her hope and desire to continue fighting as educators and activists of the past did. Jamia's call to history and the legacies of her ancestors helped her process her disappointment and comfort her young people, moving them from mourning to movement, or rather, mourning while organizing to build a better future. Despite the challenges and the precarity that youth workers face in the field, I want to take a moment to talk about the freedom dreams, the visions for the future, and how joy is used as a tool of resistance and protection for youth workers and the young people they work with. To do this, I think it's important to understand why many youth workers enter and stay in the profession. Across my studies, across race, ethnicity, gender, and region, youth workers and program leaders enter the field because they felt called to work with young people, or because they happened to fall into the work and then developed a deep passion for working with young people. For Black youth workers, a commitment to Black education and to upholding a legacy of mentorship by Black youth workers were core reasons for them entering and staying in the profession. Returning to Chris again, he credits his mentor, Brother Rashad, for staying in the field. He considers himself to be a part of a legacy. He says, "I'm not giving up that legacy for anything. I'm a Black man who was mentored by a Black man who was mentored by a Black man, and I'm not gonna break that line." Many of the youth workers we spoke with were mentored by Black youth workers and were involved in community-based organizations as teens. Morris, a longtime youth worker, program founder and leader, and now a public servant in the Midwest, first began youth work as a teenager working at the YMCA with elementary school kids. Through his work, he saw himself as someone his community valued. Youth workers we spoke with see their work as a gift, as part of their life's purpose and commitment to their communities. Black youth workers' commitment to youth work, despite the struggles that they face, is rooted in their desire for better educational futures. Despite challenges and the precarity, youth workers actively also practice joy as part of youth work. To be clear, joy is not simply a matter of cultivating enjoyment. Joy is a shield. Joy is respite. Joy is spiritual. Joy is sustaining. Joy is a central tool for youth workers' protection of youth and themselves. For the Black youth workers who shared their stories with us, the joy they cultivated for youth and the joy they experienced in their relationship with young people helped them endure the field's precarious nature. To ground us in an understanding of what joy is, I want to share a meditation on Black joy by poet and Professor Javon Johnson, who was writing in response to Ferguson, Missouri after the killing of Mike Brown. He writes, "More than a method to endure, however, Black joy allows us the space to stretch our imaginations beyond what we previously thought possible, and allows us to theorize a world in which white supremacy does not dictate our everyday lives. House parties, backyard cookouts, and other spaces where Black bodies gather in celebration produce rich and profound moments in which Black love and laughter lifts everyone slightly above the present and allows to know in our bones what Black utopia might be like. I firmly believe that in our bodies harbor knowledge, and in these moments, every smile, head nod, hip shake, and high five is an exchange of embodied truths that Black joy is phenomenally transformational. In this way, Black joy provides another set of political tactics to make do and use the invisibility and inaudibility of Black joy as a site with which to operate outside of white supremacy." As a former youth worker, I know firsthand the joy and excitement of witnessing young people's brilliance, creativity, and humor. Engaging in a profession saturated with uncertainty, Black youth workers sometimes struggle to care for themselves amid the day-to-day grind of a physically and emotionally taxing field, with limited structural support and financial resources. Still, Black youth workers foster and experience joy in their work, which is important to demonstrate the pathways to joy in the field as a form of resistance against structural harms. Kim, who grew up on the West Coast, founded an organization for students for all ages rooted in music and creativity. Her program operates in schools and during the summer. Kim and the youth workers she hires center joy whenever possible, despite the funding constraints they face. And during her interview, Kim pulled up documents and videos showing her process for engaging in youth work. She explained that building joy, building fun, becoming leaders in a joyful way is central to her organization's value and their integrity as leaders and youth workers. As part of pre- and post-pandemic strategies, Kim used gift cards and food and fellowship and music to maintain youth participation and engage the broader community. She blends music and art throughout programming because, as she says, we want it to feel like home. Creating joyful spaces in youth programming is central to the pedagogical practices of youth workers I met. Black youth workers featured in my research find immense joy in their work despite its challenges. Whenever youth workers were asked what excited them or brought them joy about being a youth worker, the response was always young people. Tamir, a facilitator, youth advocate, and lecturer committed to fostering joy and progress for marginalized communities in the South, Tamir was motivated to continue working with young people because of the excitement of watching them grow and step into their own power. He says, "There's always the look that kids get when they create something that they didn't expect to be able to create. You know, when they started off early on with an idea that to them seemed crazy, or, even their friends laughed at, and they still receive the kind of encouragement and support to keep trying. And that sort of recognition in their own eyes of having manifested something that was in their head that they can do, those moments feel like triumph. Those moments feel like the seeds of self-efficacy. Those feel like the seeds of self-confidence. And that's why I think the belonging aspect of youth programs is so important. And youth workers can see that little spark a little more frequently than some educators. This spark Tamir speaks of is connected to the many domains of life that youth workers are privy to, which go beyond students' academic achievement. This spark, or the light that shines in young people's eyes when they connect the dots and accept and believe in their power and the possibilities in their future, motivates youth workers like Tamir to keep pushing and continue their work despite the challenges they face in the field and within their specific workplaces. Returning to Kim, we asked her to reflect on the similarities between her time as a team participant in youth programs and her time as a leader of youth programs. And she says, I think specifically what's similar is a centering of choice, a centering of joy. I don't think academics is the center. I don't even like the word enrichment, but interest and passion are key. Kim then pulls up another video. This time, it's of the Black Panthers and how political education, food, music, and centering community were imperative to their liberation work. Kim reminds us that joy, too, is part of liberation work, central to education and learning for young people, and essential to the struggle for educational justice. Returning to what is so critical about youth work and community-based educational spaces is that while supporting young people's academic learning is important, helping them understand who they are, who they want to be, what the world is and will be when they step into it, and what it could be is connected to a long legacy of youth work in Black space. What characterizes the struggle for Black educational freedom across time and space is the relationship between history, present, and the future. As President Wynne writes and captured in her talk yesterday, her concept of futuring Black lives entails a deep knowledge of history, including the structural violence and terror that have shaped Black life and educational opportunities, while simultaneously holding on to what is possible for the future. With a deep belief in freedom dreaming, imagination, creativity, and institution building, futuring has always been linked to social movements for Black liberation and to the day-to-day educational projects in schools, families, and communities. Akin to how we might understand community-based educational spaces today, Wynne discusses the vital role of independent Black institutions, which include cultural centers, publishing houses, food cooperatives, and schools focused on cultivating futures for Black children and their families. Together, Black educators, parents, and community members intentionally designed futures for their children. Understanding the past and a resolute belief in the possibility of the future are paramount for youth workers in Black space. It is also a call to unforget, to remember, and evoke rememory. Knowing the past to understand our present realities as we dream of and fight for better futures. It is infectious to witness youth workers' immense joy and excitement as they envision a future for Black education and youth. The growth youth workers witness in young people is inspiring and often what drives the field. Those I spoke with engage in youth work with Black and other marginalized young people because they are future-oriented. Envisioning the future of Black education requires declaring what Black youth need now. Chris passionately offers what Black youth need in this moment, and I see it as such a beautiful articulation of futuring that I want to share it with you. He told me they need people to care. They need to know that outside of the things that they achieve in school, they need to know that outside of a sport, they need to know that outside of all these ideas about what makes them worthy, that they are enough. And that way they will continue to be enough, and that love is free and everyone deserves it. Love is a thing that everyone holds and will continue to hold and deserves to be held. Black kids just need to know that we love you all. We're not going to stop loving you all. And that's not tied to what we think you are capable of, though we also think you are capable of changing the world. Chris's reflection captures the importance of youth work in the current political moment. What I've learned from youth workers throughout my career is that youth work is the process of futuring. Engaging youth development requires belief in change and possibility. They foster joy and cultivate opportunities for young people to envision what's possible for themselves in the world. My work has been a way to usher the voices of youth workers into the academy, positioning them as central and important to young people's broader ecosystem of learning, and as one of the many educators they have throughout their lifetime. So as I come to the close of my talk, I want to think about, as educational researchers and educators, I want us to think about how we can support community-based education and youth work professionals. First, we need to advocate for and sustain federal support for after-school programs. 21st Century Community Learning Center funding supports the operation of many programs across the country. But under the current administration, there is often anxiety about whether this funding will remain. Second, we need to support our state and city-based efforts, particularly out-of-school time and after-school networks, which are capacity-building and intermediary organizations that are instrumental in supporting youth-serving organizations, professional development for youth workers, advocating for living wages, and supporting youth worker wellness. Third, we need to make the field and youth workers more visible by identifying who they are and where they are. In a promising example, AERA recently conducted the Power of Us survey funded by the Wallace Foundation to better understand the needs of youth workers. Fourth, our schools and departments of education need to expand their understanding of education and support critical scholarship on community-based education and out-of-school time. The Wallace Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and others have continued to support the scholarship on out-of-school time from a critical perspective, and I've been grateful for their support. Finally, and most importantly, we must rethink education beyond school walls. Take action to support and invest in youth workers and understand their diverse needs in light of their social positioning. We have to ask ourselves, whose education labor matters? As part of my ongoing work to support the field, I continue to find ways to bring youth workers' voices into the academy and to write about the structural support they deserve. I've been doing this work through my work as the founder and director of the Critical Youth Work Collective at Harvard University. It's a community-engaged lab where in addition to conducting research, I provide professional learning opportunities for community-based leaders and youth workers around the country who are committed to disrupting oppressive practices in youth development. I've been honored to work with a number of youth organizations and out-of-school networks around the country. My team and I are currently studying two vital issues facing the field. First, we are working to make youth workers more visible and to define the field. Based on the topology of youth work that I showed earlier, and as Dr. Nguyen mentioned during the introduction, I'm working on a third book project, a co-edited volume that helps us understand the diverse locations of youth work. And returning to the importance of socio-political context, I'm working on a study about gentrification in cities like New York, Boston, Providence, and Oakland, California, that would help us understand the relationship between race, space, and city change, and how this relationship informs community-based education. As programs are shuttering because of high rents and are forced to share space with schools and faith-based organizations to keep costs low, they are also resisting gentrification through public art and youth organizing and collaborative multi-sector efforts. This summer, we will learn from young people about their sense-making of gentrification and what they need from community-based educational spaces. As I close, I want to leave you with the charge, just a little bit of homework. It wouldn't be an education conference if you didn't have homework. As a community of educational researchers and educators, what can we learn from Black education scholars and community organizers and youth workers in communities? What can we all do to support the work that for those who care for young people so dearly, particularly those outside of school? Drawing on the past and present, we can unforget, remember, and recollect the fugitive practices, agency, and resistance we have seen throughout time and space to create and sustain educational projects for liberation. As reflected during the opening plenary on Wednesday, history is a blueprint and a pathway. And in our current political moment, as many schools cannot engage students around race, and as the histories that shape our lives in our world, community-based spaces have been and continue to be important sites for this kind of youth development, particularly in working to develop young people's sociopolitical identities to help them embrace who they are and unlearn the harmful messages they may hear in their schools and in broader society. We also must respect and value the knowledge, expertise, and pedagogical practices of youth workers. In some schools of education, teacher education programs that partner with community organizations have enabled pre-service teachers to work alongside youth workers to learn how to build relationships with students. We must acknowledge youth workers as educators. We must understand that teachers and youth workers are not in competition with one another, and that we are all responsible for young people. Lastly, we can practice critical hope, create dream spaces, and see youth work and education more broadly as a process of futuring. In 2020, I had the opportunity to serve as a scholar in residence for the Spencer Foundation, and I organized a virtual symposium lifting up youth work in a time of crisis. A program leader on the call shared that as we were managing COVID, police violence, increased anti-Asian violence, attacks on CRT, attacks on queer communities, and all the fear, all the violence, and through all of those things, that we needed to create and foster dream spaces for young people. This has stayed with me for the last 6 years. Creating spaces for young people to dream, imagine, and build is critical to youth work, and so is hope. A critical hope, though, one that understands the structural harms that shape education in young people's lives, but also believes in an imagination, vision, and holding fast to dreams. I believe that a critical hope is embedded in educators' actions, especially among youth workers engaged in nonprofit education, whose work is not always visible or rewarded with pay, respect, or recognition. They get up every day to engage in labor that is, of course, absolutely rewarding because young people are amazing, but also taxing. They do so because they have hope and are future-oriented. Their critical hopes stems from their active engagement in the process of futuring. In closing, I must reiterate something I wrote in my first book, that schools have never been and will never be the sole site of learning for young people. They never have, and they never will. I see the work within community-based educational spaces as part of a long tradition of educational fugitivity for Black people, and the spaces they created for healing and protection from communities, and also from communities fighting against erasure and targeted violence and everyday indignities. The Black youth workers I've engaged also teach to transgress, as Black feminist scholar Bell Hooks implored us to do. They push beyond the boundaries of the paradoxes and precarity within the field as they envision radical possibilities in their work with youth. This sense of possibility is reflected in all youth workers and the programs I've engaged with throughout my career. It's in the power of young people and the strength of emancipatory spaces of learning and care, when youth workers work alongside young people to help them understand the conditions that shape their lives, generate tools to help them push back on systems that harm them, and dream and envision a world anew. I see radical possibilities within youth workers who shared their stories with me, and I love in action on the front lines that allows them to get up every day and work on behalf of young people for little recognition, little pay, and long hours because they believe in the work that they do. And more specifically, they believe in the brilliance, creativity, and futures of Black youth. Thank you.